On this episode of Militaria at the Museum, we ignite the story of the Douglas AIR-2A Genie Rocket, a Cold War weapon that packed explosive power. We then trace the evolution of water canteens. Finally, we unravel the story of Lieutenant Arthur Copeland Sydney Pitt and the Halifax Explosion. Beyond museum exhibits lies a hidden realm of archived artifacts that hold the keys to unlocking intriguing stories from the past. Come along as I meet with experts at the Army, Naval, and Aviation museums, where I've been granted special access to pull back the curtains and reveal the secrets of their militaria. My name is Sandy Hiltz, and all my life I've been captivated by military history. Now, I have the rare opportunity to explore a collection of fascinating military artifacts on Militaria at the Museum. At the Aviation Museum, I'm delving into the history of the Douglas AIR-2A Genie Rocket with expert Mark People. This powerful weapon, known as the world's first nuclear air-to-air missile, embodies the suspense and uncertainty that defined the Cold War era. We look at a lot of different aircraft here at the Aviation Museum, but one thing I'm really interested in are the weapon systems with which they would have been equipped.
Well, here at the museum, we're very fortunate in that we actually have not only the aircraft, but we actually have the weapons that were carried by it. We even have nuclear-tipped rockets here as well. So why don't we go look at that?
I'd love to see those.
Okay, let's go.
Mark, I have to say, it's sort of hard to believe that we're standing here next to what were two nuclear-tipped weapons.
Luckily, they're inert, and these are actually practice ones. They wouldn't have been operational. But they're fine examples of the Genie air-to-air missile.
And who was manufacturing these?
This particular missile was built by McDonnell Douglas in the United States. And McDonnell Douglas actually built the F-101 Voodoo that actually carried these Genie missiles as well. And it was designed as an air-to-air missile to use against incoming enemy aircraft. In this case, the proposed enemy aircraft was the Russian bombers. Basically, the intent was that explosion would actually take out that row of bombers.
So unlike a lot of weapons, particularly think of weapons with nuclear capabilities, this isn't for a ground-based target. This is actually for taking out other aircraft.
Exactly. And again, it's the sort of philosophy of the late 50s, early 60s, in a sense that it's how do you stop the bomber getting through. Its main purpose was to be used as almost a shotgun blast with a nuclear tip to hit incoming, in this case, mainly Russian bombers, as that was what the perceived threat was. And in a lot of cases, it was more of a deterrent than anything else.
And were these ever deployed?
Well, operationally, yes. They were used operationally. When on Canada's Voodoo fleet, they had access to them, and they were sitting there waiting to use them.
And of course, we're talking about these from the Canadian perspective. Were they used by any other countries?
Well, the United States used them, and their own air defense Voodoo squadrons were equipped with these type of missiles as well, too. So widespread use in North America and not really anywhere else.
Mark, what sort of capabilities did these weapons have?
The missiles could go up to a top speed of about 3.3 Mach, so 3 times the speed of sound. And roughly, there's probably a 300-meter blast zone from those missiles, and probably a 1.5 to 2 kiloton nuclear tip on them as well.
And how far away could you be when you were firing one of these?
Roughly, it would be about 10 kilometers. So the backseat scope operator would have his scope, and once it hit a certain point, he would initiate the fire sequence of the missiles from the back seat.
And tell me about that firing sequence. How difficult would it be to fire one of these?
Well, it'd be pretty easy to fire it in a sense. The pilot would obviously have a blip on his control stick as well to release that weapon. To actually push that button and release it and to create that nuclear explosion, obviously that's the onus is on the combined team in the aircraft. With the Genie being nuclear tipped, its essence is really not to be used, I think is the best description of it. You're putting a nuclear explosion into the air, and you don't do that lightly. I think as with most of this weaponry from this sort of time frame, it really is designed as a deterrent, not necessarily as a offensive weapon.
So Mark, once there's word that the Russian bombers are on the way, how long would it take and what would be the process of getting those Voodoos up in the air and towards their targets?
Aerospace in North America is controlled by NORAD, a system of radar-operated sites that would be monitoring the airspace. Obviously, if a target was sighted, there would be a number of squadrons, both Canadian and U.S. aircraft, that would be ready to scramble at roughly 5 minutes' notice. So they would have a constant crew on standby. And at the peak of the Cold War in the 50s and 60s, those crews pretty much were living in their aircraft.
So that's interesting. Oftentimes, these crews wouldn't just be sitting in the mess. They would actually be in their aircraft the entire time they were on that sort of watch.
Right, and the generators to start the aircraft will be plugged in. Straps will be ready to be thrown on. And, when they were scrambled, they were scrambled. And this is not just Canada, it was also the US had it, and even examples in the UK, the RAF would be the same way. Again, looking for that Russian bomber that's coming across. And then obviously in some cases throughout this time, there's this constantly Russian aircraft sort of circling back and forth, testing where the radar were, testing that, and they would send like the Voodoo up to intercept them and to take pictures of each other and then basically make themselves aware and then move on. The 50s, 60s, and 70s, it really is that sort of Cold War era.
Did the Russians have any sort of equivalent weapon to this?
The Russians did have equivalent sort of weapons to this. Again, the Russians were very good at copying what the West was doing as well too. So there was a certain amount of trading back and forth. And as we know, that the Cold War was about spies as much as it was about weaponry and nuclear tip weapons in this case.
When did these eventually come out of use?
Basic retirement would have been sort of tied to the aircraft coming out of the service. So we're talking about the early 80s. Obviously, there was some changes in Canada's policy. The nuclear tip missile it's going to scatter. It's not going to be very targeted. What we see after is we see missile technology changing to be much more direct, and also the advent of the air-to-air missiles where they can actually fire them and home in on the targets. And that technology is coming on probably in the 60s and early 70s. And coming back to the true sense of a gunfight versus where this is not a gunfight, it's basically a blast off.
Mark, thank you for enlightening me about the Genie air-to-air rocket. It's been really interesting to learn about Canada's different nuclear capabilities throughout time.
Yes, and in this particular example here, it's sort of a combination of a weapon system that we see using the CF-101 Voodoo and the Genie rocket. It must have been quite something to strap one of these underneath your aircraft and take off with it, but and also knowing what sort of potential effect you can wreak with that missile.
Absolutely, and it's such a wonderful representation of the tensions of that Cold War era.
With a weapon like the Genie, it is a technological marvel as much as it is an awesome weapon. The technology of that time is something to factor in when we look at this particular example.
Coming up next, we'll head over to the Army Museum to trace the evolution of water canteens, uncapping how these simple yet essential tools have evolved from early days to modern military use. At the Army Museum, Nick Drain is guiding me through the evolution of water canteens, exploring their role as essential lifelines from antiquity to modern times. We'll examine how their design has evolved to meet the ever-changing demands of warfare. Nick, it seems to me that canteens are something which need to be considered in terms of both survival and comfort.
Yeah, that's exactly it. The canteen, it carries your water, and you soldiers survive off that on the battlefield, but it's also comfortable on the battlefield just to take that breather and have a drink of water and collect yourself. But also, in terms of the canteen as a carrier itself, needs to be comfortable to wear. So I have quite a few examples of those through a few hundred years, and we can just head right through and I can show you a few of them. So water, just like to everybody, it's essential, and especially when you're doing so much heavy labor like you would be in the military, it's just that much more important.
What a great selection we have here, Nick. I'm looking at them and thinking that the wood one is probably the earliest example we have, but that wasn't the first material that was used for canteens, was it?
No, actually, the wooden one here is actually the second oldest.
So what came before the wood one then?
Yeah, with the tin one here, this is your canteen in the middle of the 18th century. So you're looking at the 1740s, 50s, 60s, into the American Revolution in the 70s and 80s. Yeah, so with the wooden ones here, you start moving into these in the late 18th, early 19th century, the Napoleonic Wars. And the interesting thing about this canteen is just essentially this is a barrel that is just on a small scale. It's wooden, it's got the metal bands around it. And so it's a really big departure from what they were using previously with this kidney bean tin-shaped canteen. Their durability and their functionality and their ability to effectively carry water is very important. What also is very important is how comfortable they are, how easy they are to use for the soldier. It effectively carries a lot of water, but wearing that is not comfortable at all. That thing is going to be strapped across your chest with the bottle, with the canteen hanging on your hip. And essentially, every step you take is going to jostle it. It's going to bang it around constantly. It works well, it holds water, it's lightweight, it's tin. It gets, not right away, but, using this in the field for a little while, it's going to rust. And then their solution to that was, what doesn't rust? Wood doesn't rust. But in doing so, you've created a whole bunch of more problems that go along with using a much heavier material as your canteen.
Right, and then we've moved on and we've gone sort of back to that kidney-shaped design. And then we start to move into aluminum by the looks of it.
Yes, and after the Second World War, the industrial capacity of most nations is ramping up. Just the more materials, plastic is more available. So with this canteen here, it's got a plastic screw cap rather than your just classic cork, and as well it's aluminum. So I can open this one up here. It's in its cover. So this has a few improvements. This one you can see has been in the field for a little bit as it's quite dented. You've got your screw cap, and this actually is an American design. So this is pretty much what the design that the American Army is using in the Second World War, and then the Canadian Army adopts this after the Second World War.
When do we sort of make the transition completely away from metal to the full plastic canteens?
Yeah, so you can see that with the canteen right up here. So this is being introduced in the 1960s. There's nothing really different in the design, except the material is entirely plastic now. So you can see here, it's they're still keeping that kidney bean shape of having it curved in, and that is just with all of them. It's to fit around your hip as it's attached to your side, so it just feels better on your body.
So these are the two newest examples we have. Which comes first?
Yeah, so we have, this one actually is a bit of a intermediate design. So this comes in the 1990s. This is actually in extra pieces, a thermos. So it's, where it's made to the same shape, made the same size, so you can carry it as a canteen. But just for comfort, in cold weather, you can take the thermos with you, as well as a water bottle canteen, just to keep warm. You can keep, instead of with the plastic, you can't put hot liquids in that.
Right. And then this newest example we have, it's still keeping in a very similar design, but I noticed that there's sort of one more piece on the top.
Yes. So this is what's in use today, and essentially it's the exact same thing has been in use since the 60s as a plastic canteen. And this is actually a huge improvement for comfort for soldiers. And actually, if I remove the top right there, exposes this hole. And this actually will attach to a straw that is attached to the C4 gas mask. And you can plug it into the canteen and drink water while wearing the gas mask.
Really?
So this right here is the C4 gas mask. This is what's used today. And this big black piece is your filter. And if you go in the back right here, this is the straw that you can drink from. So it just unplugs like that, and then you plug it, right into the water bottle. And now, for a soldier drinking, he can just be wearing this mask, turn it upside down, and just drink water. Now, it doesn't seem like it's that complicated a system, but this is, to add something like this, it makes it a bit more expensive to produce.
Nick, thank you for taking me through this wonderful selection of canteens. It's been really interesting to look back and see the evolution and at times the sort of steps backwards we've taken with them, but also the ways in which we've been able to adapt them to be more durable and also more comforting.
Yeah, it's insanely interesting just looking at the canteens and just as an example of technology of how we go forwards, but sometimes it's the wrong way and we have to go back again. So we end up using sort of the same thing that for hundreds of years. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
It's been my pleasure.
Coming up next, we'll examine the mysterious story of Lieutenant Arthur Copeland Sydney Pitt and the controversy surrounding his actions during the Halifax Explosion. At the Navy Museum, I will be diving into a relatively unknown story that takes place during the catastrophic Halifax Explosion. I will investigate a scandal with Ariana House, uncovering the true story of Lieutenant Arthur Copeland Sydney Pitt during this catastrophic event.
So I understand that you've been doing some research into the Halifax explosion, and I've uncovered a very interesting story about Lieutenant Arthur Pitt.
Yeah, about 6 to 7 months ago, I was doing some archival work and I stumbled across some minutes from a court case. And from there, I've just been diving down, doing some research, and just fell down a rabbit hole. Lieutenant Arthur Copeland Sydney Pitt was a Royal Navy Canadian volunteer reservist. He joined in 1913, the year that it was established, and he served through the entirety of the First World War. This photo right here is of Lieutenant Arthur Copeland Sydney Pitt. These are his service records dating back to 1914 when he started on the HMCS Rainbow. We have the Naval Service Star from 1914 and 1915, just stating that he saw battles overseas. In the middle there, we have the British War Medal, and at the end with the rainbow ribbon, that is the Victory War Medal. These documents here are just some documents about kind of what he did with his life after the war. And at the front here is the bulk of my research, his court case during the Halifax Explosion.
What can you tell me about Lieutenant Pitt's involvement with the Halifax Explosion?
So, Lieutenant Pitt began on the west coast of Canada in British Columbia. Early 1917, he sailed through the Panama Canal to Halifax with the HMCS Shearwater in sub CC2. He was in the submarine division. Their engine needed to be replaced, so they were in Halifax for a number of months. The Halifax explosion occurred on December 6, 1917, when the French cargo ship SS Mont Blanc collided with the Norwegian ship SS Imo. The ammunition on board caught fire and exploded. It was the biggest man-made explosion of its time, and due to its range, it completely devastated the city. During the Halifax explosion, one of the crew members of CC2, Gunner George Briscoe, accused Lieutenant Arthur Pitt of running away during the time of the explosion. It wasn't until 7 months later, August of 1918, that he wrote a letter to their higher command and just stated that he believed Pitt was not fit for a promotion due to his actions during the Halifax explosion.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And so tell me a bit more about the trial. How long did it last and what was the end result?
They definitely listened to George Briscoe and his concerns. However, at the end, they still found his accusations to be inconclusive and contradictory. They had lots of witness testimonies of other submariners as well as their higher ups and Lieutenant Arthur Pitt to get his side of the story of what happened. When he finds that the subs are leaving the harbor to leave to safety, he does gather as many men as he could, and clearly he was well respected because those men listened, got on the boat with him, and sailed back towards the subs. Briscoe was found guilty of falsifying accusations, and Pitt, about 3 weeks later, actually resigned from the Navy, even though he was found innocent. We still remember him as an amazing lieutenant, And not many people know about this court case, so it was kind of under wraps. And he continued to be a broker for the rest of his career.
And did Briscoe suffer any consequences for his false accusations?
Yep, so a few months after the trial, he was discharged from the Navy. In 1940, he sent a letter requesting to be allowed back in the Navy for the Second World War, but we don't have any records of him actually joining, so it can be believed that he was not able to rejoin due to it.
Oh my goodness, that's very interesting. So they're really, the accusations of his abandoning his duty were completely baseless. Do we think that it was based on those orders to take cover that the accusation was made?
He states that he saw Lieutenant Pitts running over the wall, but this was not the case because George Briscoe was actually the one in CC1 and he was relieved by Pitts. The two theories are that he was angry with Lieutenant Pitts because a couple days before the explosion, Lieutenant Pitts reported him for not doing his job. And then another theory is that he's angry with the military. He had asked to leave to join the artillery multiple times, and he'd also asked for promotions multiple times. Every single one of those requests was denied. And so once he overheard Pitts was in the running to be promoted to commanding officer, that is when he wrote his letter and accused Pitts of running away.
So there was considerable bitterness leading up to these accusations.
Exactly, yeah.
Knowing that he was found innocent of abandoning his duty, what can you tell me about Pitt's experience the day of the explosion?
Yeah, so during the explosion, Pitts and his crew from submarine CC2 were actually doing some training on shore. After the initial explosion, there were rumors that a second explosion were to happen, so higher-ups instructed everyone to run and take cover. Lieutenant Pitts did exactly that. He ran over a wall. He found himself in some water. Once it was discovered that a second explosion wasn't going to happen, he brought himself out of the water and actually saw the two subs, CC1 and CC2, leaving the harbor. Because of this, he knew he needed to go back to his sub. He gathered as many men as he could, brought them on a boat, and he then retook power of CC1.
One hears a lot about the Halifax explosion, but this is certainly not a story I've heard before. What led you on to researching this?
When I first found this case last summer, I was still a student. When I found it, I brought it to our curator immediately, and everyone was shocked. No one knew that Pitts could have been accused of such crimes due to the fact that he was so well known.
But are there any lingering questions you have about this case?
I have a couple. My main one would be, why did Gunner George Briscoe wait 7 months after the explosion to accuse Lieutenant Pitts? And my second one would be, what made Lieutenant Pitts resign so quickly after this?
It makes one wonder if, it was sort of just a general distaste for the Navy after having gone through that, or if he felt that his career was so damaged, even though he was found innocent of the accusations.
Yeah, definitely something to ponder, and it's why I continue my research on this.
Thank you so much for pulling this all out of the archives for me and telling me about what is, for all of us, a new and fresh story about the explosion.
Well, thank you so much for coming out and letting me share this piece of information with you. This is an amazing story that not many people know about, and it shows more of the role of the Royal Canadian Navy in the Halifax explosion as opposed to the civilian side, and I'm glad we can share it with the public.
Having special access to go beyond museum exhibits reveals some of history's best-kept secrets and most interesting stories. Thank you for joining me in this exploration of military artifacts on another episode of Militaria at the museum.